Hello and welcome to GameSec. Let's check out some modern accessories for your various retro gaming needs. Don't you think it's awesome that the retro market is still completely thriving, that we can get such cool products? Anyway, some of these are new-ish, some of these they're not new, I just haven't talked about them before until now, and others I'm giving updates on. So anyway, let's get started. I covered the MemCard PRO for the original PlayStation from 8-Bit Mods before. But did you know there's now a MemCard PRO for the GameCube? Oh, there's also one for the PlayStation 2 as well. Let's check them out. The PlayStation 2 card costs between $42 and $52 US depending on your choice of color, and the GameCube one costs about $67 US no matter what. That's the GameCube tax for you. Like the original, both of these newer MemCard PROs have a screen on them and save straight to a micro SD card. Even the smallest micro SD card will likely give you nearly unlimited saves. Starting with the PS2 version, this one supports Game ID, so each game will get its very own memory card with no action required by you. It doesn't matter if you're running games from a hard drive or an actual disc, the Game ID is likely to work. The card also works with the PlayStation 1 game saves, and you can use the same SD card in both modes. You can use it on either a PlayStation or a PlayStation 2, however the Game ID will only work when running on a PlayStation 2. The GameCube MemCard PRO is much the same, however it does not support Game ID from discs, at least not directly. If you use Swiss to load games from non-disc storage methods, or even tell Swiss to boot a disc, then Game ID will be supported, and each game will automatically get its own memory card. If you don't have Game ID, then you get basically generic memory cards which will still save your games, but you'll have to remember which virtual card your game is on and cycle through it before you begin your game. Even with the newest firmware, it can take a while to create a new memory card space on the SD card. Just be sure to let it finish before you go around starting to mess with memory card functions in the game you're playing. Like the original MemCard PRO, the PS2 and GameCube versions also feature a web UI that lets you do various things. You can set up certain options to your liking, you can download and update the firmware, and you can peruse the cards that you have and even download them to your computer, though this process is curiously slow given that the files aren't exactly gigantic or anything. Personally, I prefer to just take the SD card to my computer and copy everything there, it's so much faster. But opening the folder, you can't tell what game is which. What the hell, this is useless! Not to worry, just download Nima Moshiri's Python script, link in the description, and it will very quickly append the game name to each file, making them super easy to store and manage. This single script works with PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1, and GameCube saves. Once you're ready to put a folder back on the card, his script will even create another folder without the names ready to go. None of this involves overwriting folders, so you don't have to worry about messing anything up. This really helps out with archiving and sharing save files. Overall, I think the MemCard PRO line is a lifesaver. I always hated having to deal with stupid memory cards, and now that's not a worry at all. I'm looking forward to their upcoming Dreamcast MemCard PRO.
The real battle starts right now.
Next is the Fusion from Furrtek. This is an adapter for the Neo Geo that lets you play arcade MVS cartridges on the home AES machines. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you own an AES, that means you have to use AES cartridges. MVS cartridges are usually cheaper, often much cheaper. Unfortunately, MVS cartridges can't physically fit in the AES, and the pin configuration is also different. The incompatibility can be somewhat frustrating. Well, this adapter lets you use those MVS cards. Just connect the adapter to the cartridge, making sure that the arrows line up. Then carefully insert it into the Neo Geo AES, making sure that the label that says front is facing towards, you guessed it, the front. Turn on the power and it works, and it acts just like an AES cart would. There's even an exciting little LED that lets you know if your power supply sucks or not. It'll blink if it's too weak. I do wish it had a shell around it, making it a little easier to insert into the AES. Furrtek does offer a file you can download so you can print your own, but hey, I don't have a 3D printer. Also, the Fusion doesn't fully work with the Terra Onion MVS Neo SD flash card. I mean, it will kind of work, but what you need to do first is use an MVS to load a game into Flash Slot 1. Depending on the size of the game, this can be a rather slow process. But then you can use the Fusion to play that game on the AES. I don't know why you'd need to do this because you're already using it on your MVS, but hey, that's what you gotta do. You'll probably need to hit the reset button on the AES for it to load properly. This always did the trick for me. Just keep in mind that you don't have access to the master list and the menu of the Neo SD. I'm not sure if it will work with multi-carts like the 161-in-1. Also keep in mind that the Neo Geo hardware can be rather finicky. A couple of my MVS carts will randomly reset, but not all of them.
You were so close.
It costs 60 euros on Furrtek's site, which ends up being about $103 shipped to the US all said and done. Furrtek said that this is the last batch, and they probably won't make any more, but like with anything, you never know. Thankfully, flash cartridges make running old games on original hardware a lot more financially sensible than collecting every single game. So let's check out some of the newer developments in that area. This is the OpenED from Crix. This is a very low-cost Everdrive for the Genesis and Mega Drive. The ED stands for Everdrive, not what my doctor claims that I have. It retails for about $29 US and will play most existing games and homebrew software. That's pretty dang cheap. It's open source, so anyone with the wherewithal can submit their own designs for the software or make their own OpenED carts. Don't you just love that word, wherewithal? The good news is that such people don't have to buy shady knockoffs. But anyone can still use this as a flash cart. However, this one does not have an FPGA, so you won't be playing Virtua Racing or Sega CD games. The menu is very basic. You can sort your games into folders, but it doesn't always sort the list perfectly, and loading is certainly not instant. Depending on the size of your game, it can actually take quite a while to copy it to the cartridge before you can play. Once it's loaded, the game plays fine. If you want to play the same game again, you can just press start in the menu and instantly load the game as long as the SD card is still in the slot and you haven't loaded any other game since. The cartridge comes with the CR2032 battery installed for game saves. Some games that use a battery backup won't work properly, like Phantasy Star 2 here. It'll report a lot of errors when you boot it up. You can attempt to save your game, but make no mistake, it doesn't work. I'm hoping that this game gets fixed in the future. Other games that use a battery, like Phantasy Star 4, seem to save perfectly fine. And games like Sonic 3 also seem to save fine. However, keep in mind that there's no save RAM backup function, so if you're playing through a game like Phantasy Star 4 and load a different game that uses SRAM backups, they can overwrite your current game save. Who knows, maybe someone can use that open source feature to write a small program that would write the SRAM to the SD card and back, renaming it so you can keep track of each save. The OpenED will play games that are not from the same region as your console, just as long as no region bypass is in place on the cartridge. Games that have region lock will not play. The 40 meg Super Street Fighter II will not play, but 32 megabit games will. 32X games play just fine, as you can see here, but of course you will need a 32X attached to your console. You certainly don't get all of the frills that you would with a higher priced product, but who knows? This may be exactly what you're looking for. I'd also like to briefly describe a couple of the differences in the Everdrive line. The first is the Everdrive N8, or NATE, which is for the NES. The original is fantastic, but 4 years ago or so, Crix replaced it with the NATE Pro, which retails for about $160 US. So what's the difference between the old and the newer one? Well, for one, it has a faster FPGA. This allows it to perform faster ROM loading as well as do other things like allow up to 1,024 sorted items per folder compared to about 200 or so on the regular Everdrive NATE. There's a dedicated disk swap button for Famicom Disk System games, though if your front loader NES isn't modded and you still push the cartridge down to use it, you can't reach the button. It has improved audio mixing for games that use expansion audio sound like Akumaju Densetsu here, but you'll need to have your console modified to take advantage of this if your console isn't Japanese. Of course, it offers save states so that you can save any game anywhere and then resume later, even if you've played a different game and/or powered your system off. There are other little tweaks here and there to the hardware, but my favorite feature has gotta be the NSF player. No sound test required, just load an NSF file and enjoy your favorite game's tunes, even with expansion audio. As someone who's perhaps a bit too much into video game music, I really like this. It's not perfect yet though, as I'd love to see which track I'm listening to and the ability to stop the currently playing track instead of just pausing it. All in all, the N8 Pro or N8 Pro is fantastic. But if you still have the older N8, well, that's still a great product too. Then there's the SD2 SNES, which is now called the FX Pack Pro. The FX Pack Pro is formerly known as the SD2 SNES Pro. So why did they change the name? Well, because the word SD is actually trademarked by Toshiba and they didn't want to deal with any legal shenanigans. So aside from the name, are there any differences between the new and older versions? Well, now it uses a micro SD card instead of a full-size SD card. Anyone remember those gigantic full-size SD cards? You're super old if you do. And again, the Pro uses a newer and more powerful FPGA and retails for about $230 US. The old FPGA is no longer available, so they had to stop using it. The audio circuitry is supposedly a little better than the old non-Pro SD2 SNES. This can help with MSU1 enhanced games which feature CD quality audio. I don't need to boost the volume, so it's a bit less susceptible to distortion. There are also save states now. So just before you get into that fearsome boss fight, you can save by pressing start and the R button. That's the default. Then you can get into that boss fight and die many, many times over the course of days or hell, even years. Then one day you decide to load that state by pressing start and the L button. Then you fight that boss and wow, you did it! You can even play Game Boy games with the Super Game Boy feature. Yes, that's right, you get all of the options of the Super Game Boy itself. It's a good way to enjoy Game Boy games if you don't have any other way of playing them on your TV. And yes, the extra Super Game Boy features are supported here, though you can turn them off if you really want to. You can play back SPC audio files the same way the Everdrive N8 Pro can play back NSF files. The FX Pack Pro is fantastic, though it is a costly device. To me though, it's absolutely worth it.
You just need to practice a lot more.
This is the Saroo, or is it Saroo? Oh well, who cares? It's a flash cartridge for the Saturn from, well, you can get it from a lot of places from eBay to AliExpress. Since anyone can make these, the quality is all over the map. There are two types, one that uses repurposed parts and a slightly more expensive version that uses all new components. Even the more expensive version will only cost you around $60 US or so. For comparison, the other non-mod Saturn flash cart is the Satiator, and it costs $260. My Saroo cartridge didn't come pre-beveled, so I had to carefully do it myself with a fine piece of sandpaper before I used it. The Saroo takes a micro SD card. You can download the firmware from tPunix's GitHub here, or is it TP Unix? I have no idea. He was the person who originally created the Saroo and then noped out before it was completed. Then others took the ball and ran with it, so he came back and he's making firmware now. You can supposedly find firmware from other people as well, though I haven't seen any of them. If there's any other firmware out there, please let me know, especially if it's better firmware. The files on the card need to be like this, everything inside of the Saroo folder. The bin folder can remain empty. All of your games go into the ISO folder, or ISO if you prefer. Despite being labeled ISO, the Saroo can't actually load ISO files. Instead, it uses Q and bin files. Yeah, weird how those don't just go into the bin folder. I don't know, I didn't make this thing. Plug in the Saroo and power it up. You'll be greeted by a Chinese menu which you can switch into English by tapping the L shoulder button. You can permanently change the language to everyone's favorite by editing the sarooconfig.txt file. Now it's automatically in English every time you boot up. Unfortunately, the menu itself is a mess the way it is now. Everything is sorted on a single screen. You can't have folders for US and Japanese regions or whatnot. Any new game you add just gets dropped to the very bottom of the list, so it doesn't even get sorted. The developer tries to blame this one on the Saturn's slow-ass lameness. But both the mode and the satiator have no issues whatsoever letting the Saturn sort the list or having folders. I've never tried the Fenrir or whatever it's called. I'm hoping that they can get this menu issue fixed because as it is now, it's pretty bad. Granted, this thing is really cheap. It has a built-in 1MB and 4MB RAM card, so games that require memory expansion like X-Men vs. Street Fighter here all seem to work well. Moreover, you can play the King of Fighters 95 and Ultraman if you get the dumps from the proprietary cartridges. And this also doubles as a save cartridge and what I think might be one of the Saroo's best features. Each game gets its very own save slot and it saves to the SD card. Even if the game only saves to the console itself, the Saroo will hijack it and save it to the cartridge. You will never run out of save space again, guaranteed. This is just incredible. The only thing bad about this is that as of now, it all goes into a single file on the SD card and there's no way to separate them and share them individually. Performance-wise, this part in a stall usually stutters after the voiceover on many other ODEs and it's buttery smooth here on the Saroo. This part here is always a good thing to test. Here's how it sounds on the satiator.
Get away from me, you stupid bird! Quit following me!
And now on the Saroo.
Get away from me, you stupid bird! Quit following me!
Lastly, the load times on most games is insanely fast here. Unlike optical disc emulators, it's not required to emulate the read speed of a CD drive, so it usually goes as fast as it can. Check out these side-by-side loading comparisons that I made for you so that you can see the difference using your own two eyes, assuming of course that both of your eyes work properly.
Finish!
Three, two, one, go!
Isn't that crazy? Okay, here's another comparison.
Fight! One, ready, go!
Pretty nice, wouldn't you say? It makes Mortal Kombat 2 load as fast as a cartridge game would between rounds. I mean, it is actually running off of a cartridge here after all. Shang Tsung's transformations are a little better here as well. Check out these examples.
Fight! Fight!
One of the best things about the fast loading is that it actually makes the King of Fighters games playable in team mode. There's still a bit of loading when switching out characters, but it's so much more bearable now. Honestly, it doesn't feel like a big interruption at all. Selecting the System CD player in the menu takes you to the Saturn CD player BIOS screen, and it behaves just like you'd expect, though you can't access the Saroo's game save data. Load Game Disk lets you run a CD game which you have in the drive. Yes, it will boot CDRs. This also works as a region bypass if your Saturn isn't modded. It plays just like a CD game would, but it saves to the Saroo cart instead of the system or cartridge memory. Load Binary loads whatever you have in the bin folder on the SD card. I'm not sure what this is for, as it doesn't seem to work for me. Serial Debug Shell is for some nonsense that's probably not important to 99.999% of people who exist in the world. Unfortunately, not all is rosy in the world of Saroo. The graphics can sometimes glitch, like you see here. This isn't good, but then the next time they pop up, they're perfectly fine. The audio can also glitch after a while, with the CD audio being steered more to the left and the sound effects mostly gone, only with garbled sound when it actually manages to make any sound. It should also be noted that the homebrew and fan translation community is not exactly thrilled about the Saroo. Apparently, the Saroo uses Game ID to work, and it can get that ID wrong on hacked games. I don't really understand it all, but apparently this adds another layer of error checking that everyone would need to do. I tried the English fan translation of Grandia, and what I played was fine. Same with Linkle Liver Story. Bulk Slash also seems to run quite well.
Nearing target. Straight ahead.
However, I can't even launch the Sakura Wars translation at all, probably because it's an ISO. As far as homebrew software goes, Project Z-Dream Sage 2019 here runs fine, as does Sonic Ball Blitz. I couldn't get Sonic Z-Dream to launch at all, again because it's an ISO. It's really too bad that ISO doesn't work. At this time, the Saroo's compatibility just isn't up there with the Satiator, but it does cost $200 less. And without a dedicated manufacturer, there's really no quality control in place on either the hardware or the firmware. I do like how it makes game saves a non-issue, but I wish I could manage the saves individually myself if I wanted to. That said, this is a really fun product, and I hope some of the kinks can be worked out soon.
What an incredible shot!
Okay, this last segment is an update to something I previously did an entire episode about, and for a while I resisted doing this update because I don't feel I'm the best person to necessarily talk about it, but I figured, why not? I can give you my take on how things are now with this, so let's just do it. Many people have asked me to do an update on the Mister since a lot has changed since my video 5 years ago. Well, here we are. First of all, the Mister is a standalone device based on the DE10 Nano development kit. Individual cores are written for each console, computer, or arcade game. You provide all of this yourself on a micro SD card. There are many different flavors of the Mister hardware. This is one from Mister Add Ons. These usually go for over $500 US. I do like the case on this one, and for whatever reason, I really love these little rubbery port covers. It's so dumb, but they bring me a lot of joy, probably because I am also pretty dumb. This particular case combines the optional USB hub and loses the ability of having analog output, which is something I covered in my original Mister video. So now I have HDMI out only, and honestly, it's pretty good.
Nice par.
The SD card goes in upside down because of course it does. So you want to make sure to turn this thing upside down when you insert or remove the card, or it will fall into the case, and then you'll have to disassemble it to get it out. This here really does need to be designed better. Anyway, I suppose you could get an SD card extender and let it hang out and just not worry about it. There are other Mister systems like the Limited M3 here, which is larger and has most things set up and ready to go, and even includes a wireless controller. It also comes with a few licensed games, which you unlock with NFC cards. I have mine set to direct output so that it sends 240p or whatever the native resolution of the system is over the HDMI, and then I have a RetroTink 4K upscale it to, well, 4K. Normally the Mister can do 1080p. It might go a little higher if memory serves, but it can't do 4K. While the Mister has some decent filters, I can really dial them in using the RetroTink. You can make games look just like you think you remember they looked like. I don't know why the main menu is clipped on the left in direct mode, but it is, and I doubt it will ever be fixed. However, it is usable enough to find your core and the game you want to play. But anyway, all of the cores I talked about last time are still here, and naturally many have improved, just like any emulator improves over time. That's right, I said emulator. You can enable the menu in-game by pressing the OSD button, and you can select a new core or game from here. New to the Mister since I covered it is the Neo Geo core. It's mostly fine, though the audio is extremely quiet for some reason. And on top of that, some of the channels seem to be mixed a touch lower than they should be.
I'm deaf and left to die.
But overall, it's still a great way to play Neo Geo games. Neo Geo CD is also supported. And so are the load times. Yikes. Fortunately, you can change the CD type as well as the speed in the core menu so that they're much more bearable. Also new are a ton of arcade games, each of which has their own core. I don't like the sorting though. Games starting with the are all in the T's. How did they miss that? Many of the cores are absolutely perfect, while others definitely still a work in progress. For example, Victory Road here is completely missing the voice in the beginning while MAME has it. Hopefully they fix that someday. But there are so many other perfectly working arcade games to play on here. This honestly is probably one of my favorite features of the Mister. It's a lot easier to configure and deal with compared to something like MAME. I love the ever-growing selection of games available to play here, and it's always awesome when a new one becomes playable. As far as console stuff goes, I don't think the Sega CD core was working when I covered this last. It's a good core, and everything runs as it should and not too fast like the Polymega. The 32X core is also new to me. What can I say? It's the 32X and it seems to run without issue. If this news doesn't excite you, well then you might not even be alive. Also new to me is the Turbo CD core or Turbo Duo. This is a great core with lots of options. You can boost the CD audio and AD PCM individually if you want, and boost the entire thing as a whole, which is great since normally it's pretty quiet. You can increase the CD seek time so that there's very little in the way of loading times. Games like Sherlock Holmes stay perfectly in sync if this is what you want to play. Overall, this is a fantastic core. The PlayStation even has a core. It mostly seems to work as expected and games run fine. There are a lot of options that you can enable, like making the game load faster and other such things, but you run the risk of having the game not booting. You're told an unsafe option is being used. Shame on you. There are some other cool things like being able to turn off the dithering. This is useful in many 2D games, but I'd leave it on in 3D games like Metal Gear Solid here. If it's off, you see a lot more banding, which is not good. There's also a texture filter that you can enable. This will blur all of the polygons like crazy. Be careful though, because many 2D games use polygons as their sprites. That's just how the PlayStation works. But there's a 2D detect mode to fix this. Overall, this is a pretty good core. There's even a Saturn core. This one is still a work in progress, but it's pretty impressive that this even runs. It works best if you have the extra memory module installed in your Mister. Everything seems to run at the correct speed, so that's exciting to see. The loading times here are quicker than a real CD, but slower than the Saroo. There's currently no option to adjust this. There honestly doesn't seem to be a ton wrong with it, but it does have a few issues. There's the stutter at this part in a stall, which is a common fail point for ODEs and the like.
Get away from me, you stupid bird! Quit following me!
The graphical layering here is wrong. You shouldn't be able to see a stall's shadows on the foreground in this level. Lastly, the high resolution modes are still pretty chunky looking. They have the horizontal resolution right, but this core disregards half of the vertical resolution. Another weird thing is that every time I start a game it says CD BIOS not found, yet it loads the BIOS and runs fine anyway. Go figure. I really like the debug mode, which lets you enable or disable background layers and sprites. Here, everything is disabled except for the sprites. Kind of interesting to see what parts of the background are actually sprites. Same goes with the stall. Lots of the background are actually sprites. How about Daytona? The only thing on screen here are the sprites. That's right, all of the Saturn's polygons are actually just warped sprites. That just goes to show you what a sprite monster the Saturn is. Eat your heart out, Neo Geo. Here's Power Slave only showing sprites. I guess your weapon is actually a background layer. I love finding out crap like this. And here's Sonic R only showing sprites. I don't care what anyone says, the Saturn is awesome. I really hope that this core continues to improve.
Checkpoint. Take left. Medium right, maybe.
Lastly is the Nintendo 64 core. I can use my real Nintendo 64 controller thanks to this crazy adapter called Reflex, also supplied by Mr. Add Ons. The core automatically sets up perfect button mapping for this, so there's nothing to worry about. Yep, it's the Nintendo 64, isn't it? What's cool though is that you have control over all of the filters that are usually applied to the games on the console. Hell, you can disable it all and make it look like a bad Saturn game. But it's cool at the same time. You can't get rid of the fog though. Damn, I forget how to play this one, so I have no idea what I'm doing. Wave Ray 64 looks utterly bizarre this way. It sure is weird playing games like this, don't you think? But if you fiddle around enough, you can come up with a compromise that's less garish but also not too blurry. Yeah, okay, this isn't too bad. Overall, the Mister is a cool piece of tech, but I rarely use mine. I don't really need to that often because I have all of my consoles hooked up and ready to go, but it might be a good solution for you. But people often ask me, if my house caught fire and my collection burned down, would I just get a Mister to replace it all instead? No, I would not. I'd be too busy being a person who had their house burned down. Thank you.
Oh! You did it! You finished first and got 7 points. Great race.
You've played well and made the leaderboard.
And there you go, more modern accessories for your retro gaming hobby. So, what are some products that you'd recommend? Oh, and sorry for all of the Craig Stadler insertions. Well, actually, no, I'm not. Not at all. And I'm not done. Thank you for watching GameSack.
I'm Fred Couples. What are you doing?
I'm Craig Stadler, and there's no place like inside mine. Now this is the way a pro putts.
Great putt. I'm Fred Couples.
I'm gonna drain this one.
You whiffed it.
That made my shot a little tougher.
Great shot.
Think you can get it inside mine?
Way too soft.
You were so close.
I'm Fred Couples.
I'm Craig Stadler.
I'm Fred Couples.
I'll show you my best shot.
Ooh, just too hard.
You're right on the edge of making it inside mine.
That's wet.
Don't be nervous.
Get up a little bit.
You're never gonna make it leaving it short.
Oh!
Great recovery.
It's in the hole.
Drained it. I'm Craig Stadler.
I'm Fred Couples.
I'm Craig Stadler.
I'm Fred Couples. I'm Fred Couples.